what's that thing with the audience where you sort of don't really engage with them? And so I talked to her about that a little bit, and she said, well, but you have to let them know you love them. Shock on my part. Oh, what? I'm supposed to love them? Like, they're terrifying. How can I love them?
He has won 11 Juno Awards and been nominated for 31 more. He's an officer of the Order of Canada, a member of both the Canadian Music Hall of Fame and the Canadian Broadcast Hall of Fame, and for over 4 decades, his songs and activism have inspired people around the world. We caught up with Bruce Cockburn on tour in Annapolis, Maryland.
So, Bruce, I wanted to start by asking about the fact that we've kind of intercepted you while you're on tour. Mm-hmm. So we're here in Annapolis, and you're going down the coast, and I guess you're going across the south. And I wanted to ask you about doing that, traveling by bus, doing these kind of venues. You've been doing this for a very long time. Does it get tiring for you? Do you get tired of doing this, or is that what it's all about?
Well, yes, yes to both.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course I get tired, but. Lately, the last couple of years, I've been working a relatively light load because I've got this baby at home,
yeah,
and trying to stay there for her. But so the touring happens in these little short spasms, kind of like now. This is, I think, almost a month long tour. There's 19 shows, and it feels like home to be on the road.
Is that right?
More than it does to be at home. Yeah,
I guess
for sure. It's just but you get worn out, and then then you go home and you get worn out again because the baby won't let you sleep.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, I know.
It's just different kinds of being worn out.
So, as we speak, how old is your new child?
15 months.
Oh, brother.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah. Was that old Billy Crystal line about somebody saying Charlie Chaplin had a child when he was in his 60s, and Billy Crystal said, yeah, but he was too tired to pick it up?
Well, Billy Crystal's a smart-ass, isn't he? But no, I mean, picking her up is the easy part. It's sleeping that's the hard part.
Yeah,
no,
I bet.
She's a wonderful little kid.
I wanted to take you back. Actually, I wasn't going to show you this, or I wasn't going to show this on camera, but we will. I just happen to have this because it's part of something else. But this is an old. This is an old flyer from a band that you were in.
That guy. Yeah.
A band that you were in way back in the 60s called The Children in Ottawa, with a lot of fairly legendary people in that band. David Whiffin's in there as well. But for you, I remember you and I had a conversation a couple of years ago about something else, but I remember you telling me at the time that essentially it was jazz that was your first interest when you were young, right?
Yeah, I got out of high school and I grudgingly went to music school. I wasn't that interested, honestly, but my parents were very anxious that I should get some kind of higher education, and anxious to the point of like making sure I did. So music schools, which offered a degree, had I completed my course of study there, I would have been qualified to teach music in high school, and that was the thing to fall back on. That everyone it was felt everyone needed. I think. Actually, for an artist, the opposite is true. I think having something to fall back on is
not a good thing.
Is a mistake. Yeah, I think that you need to commit yourself wholeheartedly to what it is you're doing. Then take your chances. But I didn't know that then, and my parents certainly didn't know that. And the thinking was logical. But anyway, I went to music school. I dropped out and I joined the Children, and. It just went on from there.
Was it always the guitar?
Yeah. I did study some piano. I started taking music lessons the first time on clarinet. I switched to trumpet, and I did that for 3 years. And then that got me into the first year of high school. And then I got fed up with music lessons and school music and all that, and I quit. And then I discovered the guitar, and that sort of took over, and there were guitar lessons, and there was a lot of theory training after that too. And when I went to Berklee, which is where I went, I went there to study composition, and with guitar as my major instrument, and everybody had to study some piano there too.
Yeah.
If you were in the composition program.
You had told me once that when you were there. Now I'm trying to remember this correctly, but you were getting into finger picking at the time, were you not? And that wasn't what anybody at Berklee was really doing.
No, they didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And therefore they weren't comfortable letting me do it because, as the, I forget the guy's name, Jim something, my first teacher there, said, well, we can't teach you the proper way to do it, and we can't correct any problems that you might have. We can't, because there's musculature involved, and you can hurt yourself doing things wrong, just like you can with a flat pick or playing any other instrument. And so, sorry, but you got to do it our way.
That seems strange to me, because I mean,
but then, not back then. It wasn't. Now, I'm sure that's not the case anymore.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just, we're talking 40 years ago. Like, so, the back then, when I first took guitar lessons, it was with a pick, so it wasn't a brand new thing for me. Yeah. But I wanted to pursue the finger picking thing because I had sort of just started to really learn that, and I didn't want to give it up. Yeah. But I was able to pursue it on my own, and I had lots of help from all kinds of my peers.
Now, I want to ask you just, this is a personal question about you, but at the time you said you were a very shy and withdrawn guy back then. And the fact that you chose the profession that you chose seems a tad counterintuitive.
Yes, I thought so. When I started writing songs, I had this fantasy that other people would sing my songs. I would just be the guy that wrote these songs, and I could be the guitar player in the band or whatever. That was fun. But I didn't like being out front, and I certainly didn't like the idea of being on stage by myself singing songs. But then I realized that, very quickly, actually, that if anyone was ever going to hear these things, it had to be me that sang them because nobody else was going to. And not then. And later, when I started putting albums out, people did start recording my songs. But, in the beginning, it just didn't work like that. Yeah. If I'd have been in L.A. or someplace, some nexus where, where songwriters converged with performers and so on, then that might have been different. But because, there were phenomena like Jim Webb or even Randy Newman, for instance, who, would have a career as songwriters, but not necessarily as performers so much. Randy Newman performed a bunch. Jim Webb probably did too, but those guys, were coming. The previous generation of songwriter were not known as performers, generally speaking. So, and performers generally didn't perform their own songs. Like Elvis didn't write his own songs, and Frank Sinatra didn't write his own songs. But so that was a new thing that kind of came up in the 50s and 60s.
Did it take you a while to get comfortable being on stage? But I've talked to other musicians, I think principally right now with Matthew Good in a conversation that he and I had a long time ago, where he talked about that he has certain emotional issues that he's quite open about. And he said the only place that they don't exist is when he's on stage. That's when he feels he is his most comfortable, when he's on stage. And I've heard that a lot from people.
It's not true for me.
No?
No, over the years I've become a lot more comfortable with being on stage. But in the beginning, the only way I could deal with it at all was to pretend the audience either wasn't there or that I didn't care about them at all. Right. I affected an attitude of disdain. And because that's the only way I could be there. It's like, okay, I'm doing my thing. A few people don't like it, too bad. Yeah. And of course.
Well, that can work mentally.
Well, yeah, it did, and it was the wrong way to go. And I had to unlearn it, and it wasn't that hard actually, because by the time I'd sort of been doing it for 2 or 3 years, actually the person who really changed my conscious thinking about that, I think the attitude was changing anyway, was a gal named Maureen Hayden, who used to come and play now and then at Louis Boo in Ottawa. And she was from New York, and she had this very sort of dramatic way of presenting herself. She was kind of like a precursor to another woman piano player whose name I can't think of right now, but who's very famous. But it doesn't matter because I can't think of her name. But anyway, Maury was quite impressive as a performer. She didn't have a very big following because she was a bit weird, like she did challenging kind of stuff. But I thought she was fantastic, so I was hanging out, and one week she was playing. She happened to be there on the Monday night for the Hootenanny, or open mic as it would be called now. Right. And she heard me play, and I had this song that some sort of kind of nasty put down of a guy that I'd met at a party, around the time I wrote the song, and the song was called Charlie the Walking Excuse. and it was mean-spirited and kind of funny. And the audience laughed at it, but you know, she said, "What was that song? What was that awful song you sang?" You know, like afterwards, she sort of, I was like, "Why sing a song like that? What's the point?" And then and she said, "And you know, and like with the audience, like what's that thing with the audience where you sort of don't really engage with them?" And so I talked to her about that a little bit, and she said, "Well, you know, but you have to let them know you love them." Shock on my part. Oh, what? I'm supposed to love them? Like, they're terrifying. How can I love them? but the light went on, and it was like, oh, you know, because I had such respect for her and for her the charisma that she had on stage was you know, very affecting. Yeah. And you know, I thought, yeah, okay, well, you know, I've got to listen to her. Yeah. So I started pretending that I loved the audience instead of pretending that I hated them, which I didn't do either. And after a while it took. It was sort of like, you know, you sort of fake this thing for a while, and after a while it starts to feel real. Yeah. Like, I actually do like these people. And, you know, and then, of course, the response.
And then it comes back to you, right?
Exactly. Yes. The response comes back, and then, you know, it becomes genuine.
Yeah. Somebody once told me, and I'm wondering if the same thing applies to musicians. Somebody who did stand-up comedy once said to me that the rule was there should be a rule for audiences for stand-up comics that you always give a big laugh to the first thing the guy or the woman says, because that'll instantly put the performer at ease, and then after that everything will be okay, and you'll actually get a better show. Same thing apply to if you open with do you open with something you know is going to be a crowd pleaser for those kind of reasons?
I don't know if I ever thought it through quite that way, but yeah, in effect, it's kind of common sense to open with something familiar that I suppose I'm thinking of getting the audience to relax and kind of be right with me on the same page, you know. Yeah. So to do something that is, it's hard for me to think in terms of crowd pleasers, but let's use the term. Okay. You know, it wouldn't have to be a familiar song, but it could be. Lovers in a Dangerous Time is a song that I frequently do open shows with for that reason. Yeah. It's strong. You also want to be strong. I mean, I think it's possible to be very subtle and open a show with something very quiet and demanding. I've seen people do that, and it worked really well, but it's not as much of a given as starting with something
You're taking a bit
more
of a risk
obvious.
To do that.
Because you have to, the risk you're taking is that you may not be able to develop it in the right direction fast enough for people to sort of get drawn in. Yeah. But I might also start with an instrumental piece or something that's sort of, you know, maybe not so expected, but still has a kind of call-out value. You know?
Right. Hey, let me ask you about your writing, because I noticed that on your live solo album, Slice Life, you do a number that you and Bill Hawkins, who's in that picture that we looked at earlier, co-wrote, I believe, a long time ago, way back then. Yeah. When did you start writing? Do you remember when that was?
Well, I remember trying to write a song when I was, I was about 15, and writing lyrics for a rock and roll song that I can't remember many of, fortunately, and I don't feel willing to quote. But so I guess the seed was kind of in there. I was interested in writing poetry, and I was interested in composing music, but I didn't really think of putting the two together until later. It's kind of the last years of high school, the beginning of music school, where when I was a big fan of the Beatles and Bob Dylan, and they were doing their own songs, and putting clever words in the case of the Beatles and really artful words in the case of Dylan together with music in a way that was that took the idea of songwriting somewhere that I wasn't aware that it could go, because I hadn't grown up with Woody Guthrie and that kind of stuff at all. That gave me the idea. Well, maybe I could do that too. And the last year I was in music school, I guess, or the last part of the time I was there for about a year and a half. I wrote a couple of songs, one of which the children used to do, a song called "It's Not You Who's Leaving, 'Cause Baby I'm Heaving You Out."
I remember I had this conversation, a fairly long conversation once, many years ago, with Sarah McLachlan when she was just sort of starting out. and we were talking about her lyrics, and she was quite honest about it. She said, "Well, I'm writing this stuff now that's kind of this airy-fairy stuff because I realize that I'm not that old and I haven't had any life experiences, and I'm sure it's all going to change for me as I get older," which it certainly did. But she was conscious of the fact that she was writing material based on just, nothing. There was no life experience. Did life experience, I mean, you've gone to an awful lot of places in the humanitarian work that you've done over your career. That had an impact on all of your writing, didn't it?
Oh, for sure it did, yeah. I started with a very interior view, directed view, and the songs that I was writing in the beginning were, some of them were, like a song like Together Alone is basically a standard love song in terms of attitude. But there's a lot of stuff on that first album that's very, very much interior in orientation. And most of what I did in the beginning was like that. It was using the experience that I did have, which was grappling with trying to understand my own processes and to understand the growing sense of relationship between me and the divine, and so that gets expressed in the songs using nature language a lot, or the imagery of nature a lot, because I didn't have language other than that could talk about those things. But over time, as I traveled more and gained more life experiences, other kinds of stuff kept coming in, and there was a big change at the end of the 70s when I got divorced, and I decided that having embraced the tenets of Christianity earlier on, I was in a position where, I was looking at things and going, well, I'm supposed to love my neighbor. This sort of goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago. I'm supposed to love my neighbor, but I don't even know them. I always avoided people in concentrations. I'd lived in the city a lot, but in Toronto or Ottawa or whatever, but always kind of in a kind of grudging state, So I decided to embrace it. So I went to Toronto and I started going to all-night bars and hanging out and I got a new wardrobe so people wouldn't look at me like that weird folkie from the Ottawa Valley. And would actually talk
wardrobe.
To me. Well, yeah, because people, when I first showed up there, I'm wearing a tweed jacket, and whatever, and the hipster crowd wouldn't talk to me at all. So it was like, well, I want to know who these people are, and I can't find out who they are if they won't talk to me. So I started looking more like them, and it worked, of course, because people are shallow the way we are, and and I got to it was the beginning of a whole new set of experience, really, that included eventually a lot of far-flung travel.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you about the relationship between your Christianity, and I know that in a fairly recent interview, you said that you hesitate to even call yourself a Christian anymore. But so I'm not sure whether that's the word I should use. But your spirituality and your political positions on things. Over the year, sometimes in your music, both of those things are very forthright and evident, and sometimes they're quite subtle. But I gather that because you have both of those elements in some of your music, certainly in the religious community, people have been a little pissed at you because of your political position on things. Has it been marked, demonstrable?
Occasionally.
Yeah.
Mostly not. I think I've gotten a pretty big break from people in that regard in general. Mm-hmm. I know that when I first started telling people I was a Christian, that must have alienated a fairly large Jewish segment of the audience, and for instance, right? But people stayed with me anyway, for the most part. And the same thing happened when I started getting more political, and people had to wrestle with, what does this mean now? And some people fell by the wayside. They didn't like. I got criticized, though, as much for using cuss words in my songs as I did for my political views. In fact, possibly more from the Christian community. How can you be a Christian and say that word in a song? X, Y, or Z word, and my response was one of disdain, because it's nobody's business, and because art is art. It's not bound by those kinds of concerns, and it you know, if you let it be bound by those sorts of concerns, it becomes at best clever propaganda and at worst just crap. So
I guess one of the lessons that you learn over life, and I guess we all do this, but I guess when it comes to songwriting, it's probably most evident, most applicable, that you've got to, if you're going to write a song that moves people, which I have to assume is the intent with pretty much everything that any songwriter wants to do with a song, you've only got a couple of minutes in which to do it, more or less. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to incorporate something that has the political and or the divine in it, then you have to oversimplify.
Yeah, but you oversimplify in the way that poetry does, or that abstract art does, or that any expression of any attempt to express aspects of one's relationship with the divine requires compression and shortening, because it isn't. There's no other way to do it. Yeah. I mean, we have to work with the tools we've got, and the thing that, like, the way I approach songwriting, much of the time at least, there are variations on this, but is kind of the way a filmmaker would approach making a film. You can't tell the whole story, so you show episodes or snapshots, and people can fill in the rest. And you hope to make the snapshots vivid enough that they will be invited to and be able to fill in the rest. Yeah. And then it's a question of, well, what do I show, and what order do I put it in, and that sort of thing. And so an example of that comes to mind is The Charity of Night, which is a spoken word piece that spans 30 years of time, mm-hmm. maybe more, and includes an episode from the 60s, an episode from the 80s, and an episode from the 90s, presented as a kind of long-term story of two people finding each other. But in fact, of course, they're my stories. They're not. Right. It wasn't really two people finding each other, but it was a way to make a story out of it. And those events are so separated in time, but they're connected by the chorus of the song, and which talks about the flow of things and the way memories tug at you and all that. So,
is that an easy process for you, songwriting, or is it a slow and painful one, or just slow, not even painful?
It's all of the above. You know, like sometimes it's easy. It depends. Sometimes a song leaps out almost fully formed, and other times you get an idea that you know is going to be a good idea, but it takes a long time to find things to go with it. Yeah. Have you got a lot of stuff? I know many
very prolific songwriters are like this. They have a pile of stuff that's never seen the light of day, but is out there. Do you have stuff that you've written that?
Not too much. There's a little bit, and especially from the early days. Yeah. There's piles of garbage from early on of unfinished things, little bits and pieces, but most of whatever might have been usable from that got used later, and got kind of just referred back to or pulled up from the depths for use in some future song.
Are you a perfectionist when it comes to both the playing and the songwriting?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'm a lazy perfectionist. I'm a perfectionist as far as my laziness will let me go. And then after a while, it's like, whatever.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
But I mean, yeah, I like to get things right, especially with the writing. I mean, there's laziness doesn't become an issue. Sometimes with the playing, it does be, or laziness or age or whatever. Things just get in the way. Yeah. But with the writing, you have time, so it tends to.
I want to read something to you. I found this, somebody directed me to this actually recently, and it was a piece written by a First Nations journalist actually in Canada who he talked about how his life, how your album Humans changed his life.
I read that piece.
Do you know that piece?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to quote one part. He says, he talks about this album, and he said he listened to it over and over again. There were songs of love lost, change, anger, dark irony, and an affirmation of faith abiding in the darkness, as expressed in the song that had drawn me to it, The Rose Above the Sky. But most importantly, it was a declaration of one man's politics and faith told autobiographically from the heart and ringing with the quiet authority that can only come from genuine experience. And he refers to it as your masterpiece. It must feel pretty good to read something like that and know that something you put out there changed at least one person. I'm sure more, but this is quite dramatic.
Well, what's very rewarding is this sense that somebody paid that much attention. Mm-hmm. You know, like, I mean, whether or not you're going to change people, how deep change goes, and all that sort of thing, you can't aim at that really, because you don't get to see the results. You know, if I was dealing with an audience of people that I knew intimately, then it would be a different conversation. But I mean, through the songs. But since you're putting it out there for people that are at a greater distance, just that you touch them at all is really meaningful.
Yeah.
And to have this kind of response, of course, is very touching, actually.
I've asked a number of writers, like actually not songwriters, but writers, about the idea of letting go their material. That once you've written it and it's out there, it isn't really yours anymore. And I guess in a lot of ways, it's probably even more so for music. Once it's out there, it becomes everybody else's. But
especially in this era.
Yeah, especially in this era, absolutely. Yeah. And yet, the creation of it was something intensely personal.
Yeah.
That has to be an odd feeling at times.
Yeah, it is. I mean, hand in hand with the kind of perfectionist tendency is a control tendency, you know, and so, like, I want things to be right. I want things to be the way I want them. I want people to understand this song the way I want them to understand it. But they're not going to do that.
Yeah.
They're going to understand it the way they want to understand it.
In the context of their experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it took a while to learn that. It took some kind of, you know, blows to the heart, really, in a way, because these songs they matter a lot to me. Yeah. You know, and you realize when somebody gets it totally wrong, but they still like the song, it's very disturbing. You know, it's like, well, wait, no, you can't like it for that reason. That's not what I'm saying. But, well, too bad, you know.
So, in that same regard, and we only have a couple of minutes left here, but I'm curious now, has anybody ever covered your material in a way that you thought was just appalling? You don't have to name any names, but...
I'm not going to name any names, but yes, for sure.
Yeah?
Yeah, and then other people have covered my stuff in ways that I thought, wow, how did they ever think of that? That's amazing. Yeah. You know, so it runs the gamut.
Yeah. So I'll wrap this up from where we started. You're on tour. Will you continue to tour in a sporadic kind of way with this young child, or do you see yourself winding down and just doing studio stuff?
No, I see myself performing. I mean, the studio is great when it happens. I'm also working on this book, of course.
Yes, that's right.
I have a contract. My first draft is almost 2 years overdue. I'm a real writer, you see.
Yes.
Anyway, that's going to happen sooner or later, and it's taking up kind of all the creative focus right now. So I'm not writing songs or anything like that. But touring is... Performing the songs for people is kind of what I do. You know, it's as much of me as the writer is. You know, so it's important to keep doing it.
In the tradition, I think, as you once said, of Mississippi John Hurt and those guys.
Yeah,
keep doing it
till you drop. You know,
right.
to quote Ry Cooder. I mean, yeah, those were my models in the beginning. John Lee Hooker and Mississippi John Hurt and Muddy Waters. Those guys, they just kept playing until they fell over in their shoes. You know, and I hope that the body holds out enough to let me do that.
I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for being interested. Yeah.